In this video, we will be looking at how to use a spreadsheet to track student progress using a weighted average model. You'll notice along the bottom of the spreadsheet, there are lots of different tabs that you can select. These are designed to help keep your outcomes separated and to make mark entry as simple as possible. The first tab that we're in is the instructions page. This has all of the important information for how to complete this spreadsheet, but I'm not going to worry about that now because I'm going to explain most of that in this video. The second tab is our course organization tab. This is where you'll enter all of the information about the particular course you're teaching. For example, you'll enter the course code, the school name, teacher name, and so on. In this name of report tab, though, box I should say, you may end up changing this throughout the semester. I've currently put in midterm report, but you might change that to a progress report or a final report, depending on when you're going to print your student reports later. If we scroll down into the right a little bit, you'll see that we have an option to enter the names of our outcomes. I've just picked 3 of them from our grade 9 science course and put them in here so you can see what it would look like. To the right of that, we can enter the weighting for each outcome. Currently, this is set up so that all of the outcomes are weighted equally, but that can be adjusted if necessary. To the left, we're going to enter our class list. Now we have to be a little bit careful here because we're using a spreadsheet to try and mimic a Markbook program, and it has some limitations. The biggest limitation is that we can't add or subtract names once we've started entering marks for students. So I would recommend that you don't enter any names here until you're at least a couple of weeks into the semester. Now I know some things may still change after that, but if you have a new student that gets added late, just add their name to the very bottom of the list, or if a student is removed, just leave the name there. Otherwise, if you try inserting names or deleting names, unfortunately, it's going to mess up some of the formulas that come later in the spreadsheets. Now let's take a look at how we're going to enter marks in our Outcome 1 tab. Notice that the name of the outcome is copied automatically for you, as has the name of the student in your class. I've already gone ahead and put a whole bunch of entries into this so you can see what it looks like. Along the top, we can enter the names of the assessments. There's an option to put what each assessment was out of, as well as how much you want to weight each of those assessments. I've just picked some numbers here so you can get an idea of what it might look like. As you complete each assessment, you can go ahead and enter new numbers in here based on how the student has performed. It is color-coded based on how well the students achieved at different levels. For example, if I enter a couple of other numbers here, 55 shows up as a darker red, and a mark below 50% shows up as a bright red. So be able to see those relatively easily. To the right, there's a calculated average that's going to happen for you automatically based on the student marks as well as the weight of each assessment. This is automatically done and copied over so you can see the outcome mark here. But one thing I want you to notice, and this is a really useful piece of this tool, is we have an adjusted average column. The adjusted average column will be used if the calculated average doesn't really feel like a good representation of what the student knows. Let's look at 3 quick examples here to get an idea of what that might look like. For our first student, everything seems fairly consistent. This calculated average of 84 seems quite reasonable. For our second student, however, there's 2 pieces of data that are missing. Now, in some cases, that might be okay. Maybe these weren't big assessments. Maybe the ideas that were covered in these assessments were covered in other assessments. But in this case, especially this middle task, our hexagonal thinking task, this was weighted quite heavily, and for some reason it wasn't completed. That may impact what this student's mark should actually be. Now, if we inserted a 0, you can see that the mark would drop dramatically from an 80 all the way to a 56. I'm not suggesting that we should drop the mark that far, but potentially it will drop a little bit from an 80. Again, this would be up to a teacher's discretion, and they should think carefully about what the learning goals were in this particular outcome before making this decision. In some cases, maybe reassessment is required, or possibly this was a mandatory assessment and the student just needed to get it done. Either way, the option is available for us to adjust the average. If I put a 75 in here, you'll notice the outcome mark overall has changed. Students will now only see the 75% mark rather than the 80. Similarly, for our third student here, there's a bit of an issue that's happening. This one, unfortunately, is a little bit better though. I think our student at the very beginning of this unit was really struggling, but came on really strong at the end. All of these early assessments are pulling the mark down a little bit, even though the unit test was really well done. So this calculated average of 71 might be too low. Maybe I want it to be a 75 as well. Again, we're always basing these decisions on the learning goals that are associated with each particular outcome. Now, if I move over to outcome 2, again, I've also filled some things in here. Notice this time there were only 4 assessments in this outcome. That was totally fine. Along the top here, assessment 5 to 8 are still filled in. I want to show you what that's going to look like in a moment when we look at a student page, and we're going to come back and fix that shortly. Outcome 3 also has some entries in it. Notice to the right, there's an option to fill in notes for each student, just in case you want to remember something for later on in the course. These notes are for the teacher's use only. They won't be copied into the student file. Students won't see what you write here. Now, if I scroll along a little bit on the bottom, I'm going to go over to this tab here called Final Marks. This tab summarizes all of the student work for your whole class. So it tells you every student's mark in each outcome as well as their final mark. This is a really useful tab when it comes time to uploading marks into Aspen. You can find the name and find the student's overall mark and just upload that mark instead. I do want you to notice at the bottom, this tab has a lock on it and it's colored red. That's indicating that you don't need to do anything on this page. Everything is being filled in here for you automatically. There's no need to edit anything. Similarly, when we look at our student pages, here's our student 1 page. It's also colored red with a lock. Everything here happens automatically. Please don't try to edit anything on this page. Notice the student names copied, all of the information about the course, and all of the information about your assessments that you've done in each outcome. So here's outcome number 1. Here are the 5 assessments that we've done and the overall mark in that particular outcome. That will be true for all of the outcomes that are completed. Students will be able to see how well they've done in each of the outcomes. This is one of the things that we really like about outcome-based assessment. At the top, it still gives them their overall mark in the course based on how well you've weighted each of those outcomes. Remember, at the moment, all of those outcomes were weighted equally. I had mentioned earlier that we called this one the midterm report. That's why it says midterm report here, but that's an area that you may change depending on when you're printing off a report for the students. Now, you'll notice here we did 5 assessments, but there's these extra 3 that weren't completed. I really don't want those to show up when I print this out, but notice what happens if I try and delete it. If I go into assessment 6 and hit delete, an error message pops up. So I'm going to cancel this because remember, I don't want to edit anything on this page. This is intended to be locked so that no changes happen. In order to get rid of this, I want that to happen for all of the students, not just one student at a time. So I'm going to go back to outcome number 1. I'll go into the title here, and I'm going to delete the names of those assessments. Now, when I look at my student report, those have been deleted, and it looks a little bit cleaner while we print our report off. Speaking of which, now we want to talk about how we can actually print these reports. There's lots of student pages, and again, we don't want to edit any of them. We just want to be able to print them to give them to the students. We can do that all at once. The way we'll do that, go to File and select Print. We're probably going to want the portrait mode. That just works a little bit better. But sometimes, depending on how well everything's been entered, fit to width might not be a good choice. Sometimes this will actually move on to a second page on you. So click on here and make sure you just say fit to page. That way one page will work for each student. Now, the other problem currently set up is that this is just our very first student, and I want to be able to print all of our students at the same time, rather than going to each tab and having to do it individually. To do that, go to the print section and select Workbook. That's going to bring up every single one of our tabs that we've had previously. I don't need to print the first few. I'm going to go in and unclick all of these other ones and just leave my students left to print. Slide down to the bottom and select Apply, and that will allow you to just print all of your student pages. I think that covers the basics of what you needed to know for these spreadsheets. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. If you have any questions about how to use this spreadsheet, or any other questions about outcome-based assessment in general, please contact the Secondary Program Department.